Marian Hale stepped from the Northern Pacific coach with Samuel Price's last letter in her glove and saw a stranger holding a strip of black cloth around his hat. She did not resemble the small photograph Samuel had sent. Samuel had been fair-haired, narrow-faced, and smiling beside a young apple tree. This man was taller, dark-haired, and grave. He stood beneath the North Yakima depot awning, while two draymen, a station agent, and a woman with a carpet bag watched Marian understand that no groom had come. "Miss Hale," he asked. She kept one hand on the handle of her trunk. "Where is Samuel Price?" The stranger removed his hat. "I'm Gideon Price, his brother. Samuel died 8 days ago." The engine breathed behind her. Steam drifted between them and vanished. Marian heard the conductor call that the eastbound connection would leave in 37 minutes. She had spent 6 days traveling from Ohio. Her savings had crossed the country in the freight car behind her, bolted into an iron and copper fruit evaporator that Samuel had promised would make them partners before it made them husband and wife. Why was I not told? I sent a telegram to Chicago. It reached the office after your train left. Gideon offered a folded message, but did not step closer. The wagon overturned coming down Sella Ridge. He lived until morning. The station agent looked away. The other passengers did not. Gideon held out a second envelope. "There is money enough for your return ticket and meals." Samuel kept it in the cash box marked with your name. "You may take the eastbound train. Mrs. Voss has a respectable boarding house if you would rather rest first. Either way, you owe me nothing." It was the correct thing to say. Marian hated him for being the man present to say it. "My evaporator is in the freight car." His eyes shifted toward the siding. That small hesitation frightened her more than the morning band. "It arrived yesterday," he said. "The freight charge is unpaid." Samuel also promised drying space to 11 growers. "Their early pears are already coming ripe." "That is not my debt." "No. And I am not your bride." "No." The clean answers gave her no enemy to strike. The conductor raised his watch. Gideon placed the fair envelope on her trunk rather than in her hand. "If you leave now, I will see that your machine is stored until you instruct the freight office. If you remain, I can pay you to make an inventory before Samuel's creditors arrive on Monday. 14 days. Separate lodging. Written wages." Marian looked at the train, then at the freight car, containing nearly every dollar she possessed. She could go home unmarried, poorer, and ignorant of what Samuel had done in her name. Or she could stay long enough to separate her property from his promises. She picked up the fair envelope and put it inside her coat. 14 days, she said. I inspect the machine before it leaves the siding. Mrs. Voss keeps my room. You do not open my letters, direct my labor, or call this an engagement. Gideon replaced his hat. Agreed. The train pulled away without her. Only then did Marian notice Samuel's last letter still folded in her glove. Across its final page he had written, "My brother can be trusted when a promise becomes expensive." She looked at the brother who had been waiting beneath the black band and wondered which promise Samuel had meant. Mrs. Voss's boarding house stood 2 streets from the depot, close enough that Marian could hear coupling irons strike at night. The widow gave her a narrow upstairs room, a washstand, and a lock whose key turned cleanly. Gideon paid the first 2 nights in advance and left the remaining decision to Marian. The next morning, he brought a written agreement witnessed by Mrs. Voss. It gave Marian 14 days' wages for inspecting the Price drying house and Samuel's contracts. It stated that her lodging, return fare, personal correspondence, and evaporator assembly remained beyond Gideon's control. It promised no marriage, no household labor, and no claim upon her money. Marian read it twice. "You left out meals at the orchard," she said, "because you may not want them. I may want them and still prefer their cost recorded." She added a daily meal allowance. His mouth moved as if he might smile, but had forgotten the practice. At the freight siding, Marian found 6 wooden crates stenciled M. Hale, North Yakima. The boiler shell was dented but sound. The drying trays, copper pipes, gauges, and fire brick had survived. Samuel's freight invoice listed Marian as purchaser. The bill of lading did too. Then the freight clerk produced a storage claim and an unpaid balance of $186. Mr. Samuel Price said orchard receipts would settle it, the clerk explained. Marian turned to Gideon. "What orchard receipts?" "None yet." The Price orchard lay 4 miles north, 40 acres of young apple and pear trees beside a weathered drying house. Gideon owned the land. Samuel had managed sales, correspondence, and the new enterprise. A crew of 3 had repaired the roof and built a furnace bed for Marian's machine, but the building still smelled of green lumber and old smoke. On a long grading table sat 11 packets tied with different colors of string. Each contained a grower's deposit and Samuel's promise to dry a stated quantity of fruit. Marian counted the figures. Then she counted them again. "He sold 62 days of work," she said. "The season gives us perhaps 38. With 1 shift. He promised 2. 2 shifts require twice the wood, twice the hands, and someone awake beside a boiler at 3 in the morning. Gideon nodded toward himself. "You manage an orchard," Marian said. "Have you run an evaporator?" "No." "Then nodding is not competence." His gaze settled on her, steady rather than offended. What would competence say? She hated that the question pleased her. It would say Samuel sold hope faster than fruit can surrender water. It would also say the machine can do more than he calculated if the slices are uniform and the air draw is corrected. Gideon showed her the house on the orchard property, where he and Samuel had lived. He had moved to a bunk room behind the horse barn. Marian could use the east bedroom if she wished, but she chose Mrs. Voss's room instead. "The road is passable every day," he told her. "I'll drive you when you ask. Not when I decide." On the desk in Samuel's office stood an unfinished wooden model of a house with 2 front doors. One door was labeled Samuel. The other had a faint pencil mark, Marian. She touched neither. Did he build this? During the winter. He wrote that the house was nearly ready. He meant the idea. The answer was painful and honest. Marian closed the office door. "Tomorrow," she said, "we open every contract." The growers arrived before breakfast. There was Amos Reed with 20 acres of pears, Mrs. Lynn, who supported 2 sons from a 5-acre orchard, the Bell sisters with late plums, and 7 others whose deposits Samuel had accepted. They filled the drying house with dust, questions, and the smell of fruit carried in sample baskets. Gideon began by telling them Samuel was dead and the contracts might exceed the machine's capacity. Amos struck the grading table with his palm. "Might." Marian stepped beside the colored packets. "They exceed it under the schedule you were sold. I will not pretend otherwise." Several faces hardened toward her. To them, she was the Eastern bride who had arrived with a machine and no dead brother to mourn. Mrs. Lynn asked, "Will you take it back east?" "It belongs to me. I have not decided what I will do." Gideon did not soften or contradict her. Miss Hale's property is not the Price estate's property. That cost him something. Marian saw it in Amos's expression. For 3 days, they assembled the evaporator. Gideon understood weights, flues, draft, and timber. Marian understood heat, fruit thickness, sulfur fumes, and the point at which a pear became preserved food rather than scorched leather. She rejected his first furnace door because it admitted too much air. He rebuilt it without argument. He stopped her from setting a loaded tray rack on an uneven plank that would have tipped. Their first disagreement came over the night shift. "No woman should sit alone here after midnight," Gideon said. Marian laid down her calipers. "Then no man should either. Boilers do not favor whiskers." He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "That is not what I meant." "It is what you said." After a moment, he amended the schedule. 2 people on every night watch, one of them trained by Marian. Mrs. Lynn volunteered, as did Gideon. Marian accepted both. The first trial batch failed. The upper trays dried too quickly. The lower fruit remained wet. Marian changed the slices, shifted the baffles, and failed again. By dusk, her confidence had narrowed to a hard line between her shoulders. Gideon found her staring into the cooling chamber. "You may say it," she told him. "Say what?" "That you spent money on an Eastern woman who cannot make her own machine work. I spent $6 on lumber, and 2 days obeying measurements I did not understand. The machine is yours. The failure belongs to the draft." He lit a lamp and crawled beneath the floor. An hour later, he called her down. A stone pier blocked the return air channel Samuel's drawing had ignored. Removing it required a jack, cribbing, and more strength than Marian possessed. Gideon did not pretend she could do it. She did not pretend his strength made him the designer. They worked until midnight, each necessary and neither sufficient. The next batch emerged evenly amber, flexible, and sweet. Mrs. Lynn laughed first. Gideon broke a slice in 2 and handed Marian the larger half. She tasted it. Too thick. You could permit one victory to live until morning. It would grow vain. That surprised a laugh from him. It was low and brief, but it changed the room. On the 4th day, Marian signed a revised schedule under her own name. She gave every grower fewer guaranteed loads and returned part of each deposit. Gideon offered orchard money to cover the shortage. She stopped him. "Samuel made the promise. The machine and I will earn the correction. You did not make the promise." "No, but I am making this one." It was her first choice that bound her to the valley, and she understood its danger only after the growers began bringing fruit. Samuel's letters had arrived in Ohio tied with blue sewing thread because Marian once told him string cut the paper. During her 2nd week, she spread them across Mrs. Vossez's parlor table. Gideon sat opposite her at a distance she had chosen. They were searching for any reference to freight, deposits, or ownership. The practical facts were clear. Samuel had described 40 acres, a drying house, and a partnership. The accidental truths were harder. His worry about Gideon's caution, his delight in Marian's calculations, his habit of promising results before knowing their cost. One sentence appeared in 3 letters. "There will be a room for your work, and no one will take its key from you." Marian had believed it referred to the office. Now she wondered whether Samuel had known how often her brothers entered the preserving room back in Ohio, used her supplies, and called the profits family money. Gideon found a freight receipt folded behind the photograph. The receipt showed Samuel had paid the first installment with the growers' deposits. He had not stolen Marian's ownership, but he had entangled her machine with their money. "Did you know?" she asked. "Not until after the accident." It was almost true. Gideon kept his face still. Marian noticed. Before she could press him, Amos Reed arrived with a probate agent named Hollis Rourke. Rourke had lent Samuel money for the boiler foundation, fruit crates, and advance wages. His note came due in 6 days. If unpaid, he intended to claim Samuel's business assets. "The evaporator is not Samuel's asset," Marian said. Rourke examined the bill of lading. The estate paid part of its freight and prepared its building. A court may need to determine the interest. His position was not wholly false, which made him dangerous. Gideon offered a lien on his next apple crop. Rourke declined. "Your trees are young. Sell me the south 8 acres and the drying house." Those acres included Mrs. Lynn's leased cottage and the irrigation lateral serving 3 small orchards. Rourke promised to honor the water for 1 season, not longer. After he left, Gideon said, "I can sell the horse team. Before harvest. We can hire hauling at twice the cost." Then we find another cost. Marian heard no heroics in him, only arithmetic with blood beneath it. That evening, the furnace chimney began drawing sparks onto the cedar shingle roof. Gideon climbed with wet sacking, while Marian shut the draft and cleared the firebox. A burning shingle fell through the scaffold and struck his sleeve. She beat out the flame with her apron. When he came down, his wrist was blistered. "May I?" she asked. He gave her his hand. She cooled the burn at the pump and wrapped it in clean linen. It was their first chosen touch, practical and quiet. Gideon watched her knot the bandage. "Samuel wrote that you disliked being helped," he said. Samuel confused dislike with lack of practice. "So do I." For one breath, neither moved. Then Marian released his hand. The next day was the end of her 14-day contract. Gideon placed her full wages beside the return envelope. "Few are free of the agreement," he said. Outside, wagons of pears waited in the sun. Marian took the wages. She also wrote a new 30-day employment contract in which she, not the Price estate, operated the machine. "I am staying for the fruit," she said. Gideon signed. "I know." The fact that he did not claim she was staying for him made it harder to leave. By September, the drying house ran 18 hours a day. Marian divided the growers into crews and paid equal wages for equal shifts. Mrs. Lynn proved better at judging plum readiness than anyone. Gideon could hear a loose belt before it slipped. Marian knew when the fruit had lost enough weight to keep through winter. Their arguments became shorter because each learned where the other was, usually right. The model house remained in Samuel's closed office. Marian slept at the boarding house and rode to the orchard in a hired wagon when Gideon could not take her. She paid her own fare. Gideon kept his meals at the bunk room and never arranged a domestic life around her without asking. One cold evening, he left a covered plate on the drying house step. "Mrs. Voss said you missed supper," he explained. "Did she charge you?" "She charged you." "I carried it for nothing." Marian opened the cloth and found chicken pie with the crust edge she preferred. "You remembered. You always leave the middle until last." It was such a small observation that it reached where grand promises could not. Later, as rain ticked against the roof, Gideon told her about Samuel. Their father had died when the boys were young. Gideon had become the one who counted sacks and checked gates. Samuel became the one who saw orchards before there were trees. He made people believe the future had already agreed to arrive, Gideon said. That is what his letters did. "I know." The answer carried guilt, but the boiler whistles interrupted before Marian could ask why. The next morning, she received a letter from a Portland preserving company. Mrs. Voss had written on her behalf. The company offered Marian a salaried post supervising winter experiments and would pay freight to move the evaporator after harvest. She folded the offer before Gideon entered. Her old instinct said to keep an exit private until she could use it. Yet secrecy had always made her feel safe by making everyone else less informed. She handed him the letter. "They need my answer in 12 days. Gideon read only the first page and returned it. That is good work. It removes the machine. Is still good work. She had expected persuasion. His refusal to give it left her strangely exposed. That afternoon, the drive belt snapped. Marian tried to stop the flywheel with a wooden brake, but the handle kicked loose and threw her against the wall. Gideon cut power and caught the rack before it toppled. Her ankle would not bear weight. For the first time, she had to surrender the floor to him. From a chair, she gave instructions while he and Mrs. Lynn installed the spare belt. Gideon repeated each order, neither resenting nor worshiping her expertise. When pain clouded her judgment, he refused to restart until the shaft alignment was checked. I said it will hold. You also said standing would hold. She glared at him. He waited. Mrs. Lynn hid a smile and checked the shaft. It was out by half an inch. That night, Gideon drove Marian to the boarding house. At the steps he asked, "May I carry you?" "No, give me your arm." He did. He bore only the weight she chose to place upon him. At her door, Marian said, "Samuel promised me a place that was not borrowed." Gideon looked at the key in her hand. "Then do not accept one from me until it is yours." It was the first time she felt safe with him, and the first time safety frightened her. The midpoint came in the form of a county clerk, 2 stamped papers, and Samuel's missing account book. Mrs. Lynn found the book behind a loose furnace brick where Samuel had hidden it from Rourke. Inside were the true deposits, the double promises, and a page titled Marian's Share. Samuel had recorded Marian's evaporator as entirely hers. He had also written that the Price Drying House owed her 1/3 of all net receipts until her freight and installation costs were repaid. The account gave Marian more power than she had known. It also showed that 3 families had paid Samuel, with nearly all their ready money. If Marian removed the machine for Portland before their apples were dried, they would lose both deposits and crop. The law might favor her property. Hunger would not care. Rourke offered a clean solution. He would pay Marian's freight balance and buy her evaporator at full original cost. He would then take the drying house and south acreage from Gideon, operate the machine for profit, and honor only contracts that paid a second fee. "You could leave solvent," he told Marian. "No reasonable person asks a stranded woman to risk her savings for strangers." Gideon stood by the office window. He is right about what no one may ask. Rourke left the offer open for 48 hours. That evening, Marian and Gideon walked the orchard rows. Her ankle had improved, but the ground remained uneven. When she slipped, he offered his hand and waited. She took it. Neither pretended the touch was required longer than the bad patch, yet neither released it at once. "If I accept Portland," she said, "the company can ship the machine in 2 weeks." "Yes." "If I accept Rourke, I recover everything." "Yes." "If I stay, I may lose the machine and the money." "Yes." She stopped beneath a pear tree. "You are a poor courtier. I am not courting you while your property is tied to my land." The restraint in his voice held more desire than a practiced declaration. Marian lifted her face. "And if it were not tied?" His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "I would ask whether you wanted me to." She could have answered. Instead, she asked about Samuel's account book. "When did you first suspect the contracts were doubled?" Gideon looked toward the dark drying house. "Before your train arrived." "How long before?" 3 days. "Why did you not tell me at the depot?" "I did not know the sums." "That was not my question." He had no safe answer, and his silence changed the evening. The next morning, Gideon rode into town alone. He met the probate clerk and requested an emergency inventory order that would keep every disputed asset, including Marian's evaporator. in place until creditors and growers could be heard. He told himself it would prevent Rourke from seizing the machine. He told himself 40 families needed time. He told himself Marian could still argue ownership. He did not tell Marian before filing. At noon, she came to the drying house with a decision. She would decline Rourke's purchase, postpone Portland, and operate through the apple harvest if the growers accepted a transparent rationing plan. Then the county clerk arrived and nailed the inventory notice to her machine. Marian read Gideon's signature at the bottom. The trust between them did not break loudly. It became exact. "You used the court to keep my property where you wanted it," she said, "to keep Rourke from taking it, and to keep me from taking it." Gideon could not deny the second truth. Marian removed her work apron. "Mrs. Lynn can run today's temperatures. My employment ends now." He took one step toward her and stopped before closeness became pressure. "Marian, you said no one would take the key from my room. You found a larger door." She left the drying house while the machine continued to turn behind her. For 4 days, Marian did not return to the orchard. She hired a lawyer with part of her return money and filed proof of purchase. She accepted temporary work at the depot telegraph office, copying freight lists, and rented Mrs. Voss's room through November. Her alternatives were smaller than Portland, but they were real. At the drying house, Gideon followed Marian's written procedures with Mrs. Lynn. Production slowed. 2 loads scorched. Amos accused Marian of abandoning families whose deposits had bought her machinery. Gideon answered before the accusation reached town. "The machine is hers," he said at a growers' meeting. "My brother used your deposits without her knowledge. I asked the probate office to hold her property without her consent. If you blame her for leaving, you are helping me make control sound like necessity." The room divided. Some growers believed Gideon had protected everyone from Rourke. Others believed a just purpose did not make Marian's ownership negotiable. Rourke used the division. He offered cash for growers' claims at half value, gathering enough notes to force a sale of Samuel's estate. Frost was forecast within 10 days. Apples still hung on 6 orchards. Gideon went to Mrs. Voss's parlor and waited by the open door. Marian did not invite him farther. "I withdrew the inventory request," he said. "The clerk will release the machine tomorrow. Because my lawyer would defeat it. Because it was wrong before he tried." He placed Samuel's account book, the freight documents, and the drying house schedule on a chair between them. "I knew enough at the depot to tell you Samuel had promised more fruit than we could dry. I feared you would put your machine back on the train. So I gave you facts one at a time until staying seemed like your own conclusion. It was my conclusion. Made inside a room I furnished." The precision of his admission hurt more than excuse would have. "What consequence do you expect?" she asked. "Whatever follows. I have signed a statement that the estate has no ownership in the evaporator. I will not oppose removal. I have offered the south acreage to Rourke for the debt, but not Mrs. Lynn's cottage or the shared lateral. If he refuses, he may force a larger sale. And the fruit. Some will freeze." Gideon set a brass-handled valve key beside the papers. It controlled the main steam line. Samuel had worn it on his belt. Gideon had carried it since the accident. "This should have been yours when the crates opened," he said. Marian did not pick it up. He left without asking forgiveness, work, or affection. The next day, the release order arrived. Marian could sell to Rourke, ship to Portland, or operate on her own terms. Mrs. Lynn came to the boarding house, carrying a basket of bruised pears. "I will not tell you to save us," she said. "My deposit helped Samuel pay your freight, but you did not authorize it." Gideon was wrong. Both things remain true. What will you do if the apples freeze? Sell the cottage if I can. Move to my sister's laundry in Tacoma if I cannot. There was no villain in that answer, only cost. Marian looked at Samuel's blue thread letters, the Portland offer, and the valve key, still untouched, on her table. She had spent years refusing to let family need turn her work into communal property. Now freedom had been restored, and it did not tell her what to do with it. Full truth arrived from an unexpected hand. The station agent found a damaged mail pouch recovered from Samuel's wagon. Inside was a final letter addressed to Marian, stained by rain and never sent. Samuel confessed that the drying house was built on Gideon's land, not jointly owned as he had implied. He admitted using grower deposits for freight. He believed the first season Hate's profits would correct everything before Marian arrived. Then he wrote the sentence that split her anger in two. Gideon will object, because he believes a promise is honest only after the cost is counted. I have always believed a good future permits a man to borrow from the present. Samuel had loved possibility. He had also spent other people's choices. Marian took the letter to the orchard. Gideon was dismantling the wooden house model in Samuel's office. He had removed the roof and separated the two labeled doors. Why? She asked. Because it was built from ground. Neither of you owned together. She handed him the letter. He read it, sat down, and covered his eyes with one hand. His grief had lived beneath labor so long that seeing it felt like entering a room without permission. Marian waited by the door. I spent half my life correcting him, Gideon said. After he died, I wanted one of his promises to survive. I chose yours because it looked beautiful. You chose it for me. Yes. The strongest silence between them held no romance. Only recognition. Gideon showed her the sale papers. Rourke had refused the smaller parcel and petitioned to auction the drying house, the south orchard, and the water lateral. The auction would satisfy lawful debt, but could end 3 neighboring operations. Gideon could contest it for months, yet the fruit would be lost in days. There is another way, Marian said. Rourke wants income more than timber and dirt. Give him a limited toll from the drying house until the verified debt is paid. He will demand control. Then he receives nothing until the court sale. And he risks buying a building without my machine. Gideon studied her. Are you offering to keep it here? I am considering a business proposal. Do not mistake that for returning to you. I won't. They worked at opposite ends of the grading table. Marian drafted a schedule that guaranteed each grower enough drying space to preserve seed money and winter food, then sold remaining capacity by weight. Rourke would receive a fixed toll. Gideon would lease the building to Marian for 5 years at a stated rent. Marian would own the enterprise and machinery. No marriage, courtship, or residence appeared in the terms. Rourke objected that the plan protected small growers at his expense. It pays your verified debt with interest, Marian said. It does not pay you for distress you did not create. His partial truth remained. He had lent actual money, and delay had cost him. Marian increased the toll slightly. In exchange, he released the lateral and cottage from the sale petition. The growers objected to reduced capacity. Marian showed every number. Thamos asked whether she would risk her whole machine while they risked only fruit. No, she said. You will each sign responsibility for wood, labor, and spoilage within your control. Freedom is not the privilege of the person holding the most expensive object. The vote passed 7-4. That night, Marian accepted Portland's winter position but negotiated a December start. She would remain through the hard frost, then leave for 3 months while Mrs. Lynn managed the works for wages and a profit share. She told Gideon before sending the telegram. He said, "That is good work." This time, she knew what the words cost him. The hard frost arrived 4 days early. At sunset, the valley temperature fell below freezing, while wagons still crowded the orchard road. The final loads could not all be saved. Marian posted the rationing list where everyone could see it. Food stores first, then fruit belonging to growers with no other market, then commercial loads by contracted share. Famous Reed demanded priority for his largest crop. Rourke supported him because greater volume meant faster repayment. "A machine is not justice merely because it runs," Marian said. "The order stands." She risked more than money. If the plan failed, Portland would hear that she had mismanaged the first Western enterprise bearing her name. At midnight, the boiler feed pump cracked. Gideon knew how to forge a temporary strap. Marian knew the chamber could retain heat for 22 minutes before the lower trays spoiled. Mrs. Lynn reorganized the crews. Amos brought his blacksmith tools after seeing his own fruit moved down the list. The first repair leaked. Marian's practiced calculations offered no answer because the replacement iron expanded differently under heat. Gideon wanted to tighten the strap immediately. He stopped himself. "If I wait, we may lose the lower chamber," he said. "If I tighten it, the housing may split." Your machine. Your decision. It was the same fear that had driven him to the probate office. Prevent loss before another person could choose. This time he placed the choice in her hands. Marian listened to the pump and failed to understand its new rhythm. "I need your judgment," she said. "Not permission. Not surrender. Trust." Gideon wedged the housing, tightened only the upper bolt, and redirected pressure through the wash line. Marian reduced the chamber temperature and doubled the tray turns. The pump held. Near dawn, a wagon overturned at the loading ramp. Gideon pulled the driver clear while Marian shut the steam line. A falling crate struck Gideon's shoulder and drove him to one knee, but no one was trapped and no fire started. The accident cost them 40 minutes and 3 loads of apples. They could not save everything. They saved the winter food, Mrs. Lynn's crop, both Bell sisters' plums, and enough of Amos's apples to keep his hired families through January. The remaining frozen fruit went to livestock or cider at a loss. When the shift ended, Rourke signed the toll agreement. Gideon signed the 5-year lease. Marian signed last, then took the brass valve key from her pocket and hung it beside the pressure chart. Not on her belt, not in Gideon's hand, but where the operator on duty could reach it. The external fight ended without a triumph. The debt would take 3 seasons to pay. Gideon lost the south 4 acres. Every grower lost fruit. Marian's machine needed a new pump she could not yet afford. Outside, frost silvered the ruined apples. Gideon stood with his injured shoulder bound. "When you return from Portland, may I court you?" Marian looked toward the drying house she now controlled and the road that could still take her away. "You may write to me while I am gone," she said. "You may not write as Samuel would have." How did Samuel write? As if wanting a future made it true. "Then I will write what happened that day. And what it cost. And what it cost." She stepped closer. "You may kiss me now, if you understand that it settles nothing." "I understand. Do you still wish to?" "Yes." Their first kiss was careful, tired, and freely begun. Did not repair the past or promise marriage. It marked the first moment. Neither of them borrowed certainty from the future. In December, Marian boarded the Portland train with her wages, her return money, and a signed business contract in her own case. Gideon did not ask her to shorten the winter. He only handed her the first of the letters he had promised. On the envelope he had written, Today the new pump cost $31, and I missed you at breakfast. Marian laughed before the train began to move. Gideon wrote every Sunday. He reported cracked trays, paid tolls, Mrs. Lynn's improvements, and the exact number of times he had nearly made a decision that belonged to someone else. Marian answered with experiments from Portland, questions about the orchard and truths she once would have kept until they became accomplished facts. She returned in March because the drying works needed its owner for spring contracts, and because she wanted to see him. Courtship lasted through planting, thinning, and the first pear harvest. Gideon visited Mrs. Voss's parlor. Marian ate supper at the orchard when invited. They quarreled about wages, chimney height, and whether Samuel's office should be preserved. They learned that asking did not weaken a plan, and disagreement did not threaten departure. In September, Gideon proposed without land, shelter, or debt in his hand. "I would like to marry you," he said at the grading table. "The drying works remain yours. The orchard remains mine. The house may be ours, only if we write what that means. If you say no, your lease, water, work, and welcome remain unchanged." Marian asked for a week. He gave her 8 days by not mentioning it on the 7th. She accepted on the condition that Mrs. Lynn retain management shares, that Marian keep a winter month each year for experiments or teaching, and that neither spouse pledge the other's property. Gideon required 1 term of his own, no secret exit plans. If either wished to leave, they would say so, while choice remained possible. They married in Mrs. Voss's parlor, with the station agent, the growers, and Samuel's empty chair, absent by deliberate agreement. Samuel was remembered, but he was not made the author of their marriage. The practical future remained narrow. Rourke's toll continued. The south acreage belonged to another man. 3 families never recovered their full deposits. Gideon's shoulder ached in cold weather. Marian spent 2 more seasons rebuilding the money Samuel had entangled. Yet the household changed visibly. The east room became Marian's workroom, under a deeded lifetime use independent of marriage. Gideon knocked before entering. Marian stopped keeping her packed trunk beneath the bed, though her return fare remained in her own account. Large household expenses required both names. Each business kept separate books, and the drying works paid the orchard openly for fruit and rent. They dismantled Samuel's model house. From its boards, Marian built a shallow cabinet for contracts. She preserved the 2 little front doors inside it, side by side but unattached, as a reminder that a shared home could not be constructed by naming someone else's entrance. One October morning, Gideon brought the first ripe pears into the drying house. Marian tested one, found it sweet, and marked the grower's lot on a fresh tray card. Above the grading table hung a painted sign, "Hale Valley Drying Works, weight, wages, and promises recorded here." Gideon set a second work stool beside hers, leaving enough space that neither blocked the other's way. Marian moved it 2 inches closer. The blue thread letters rested in the contract cabinet. Samuel's final letter was among them, neither destroyed nor displayed as romance. The brass valve key hung beside the operating chart for whoever held the shift. Outside, growers delivered fruit under contracts they could read before signing. Gideon handed Marian the first pear slice from the new season. This time, he gave her the smaller half. She raised an eyebrow. "Last year you said the larger one would grow vain." She laughed and traded pieces with him. Their love had not made Samuel's deception harmless, nor Gideon's control necessary, nor Marian's sacrifice owed. It had grown only after each debt was named, each choice returned, and each promise given a cost. The valley still argued about Marian's decision. Some said she had been right to risk her machine for families whose deposits had been misused. Others said keeping it in Washington rewarded the very pressure that had trapped her. Marian herself never called the choice selfless. She called it hers. And that left one question reasonable people could answer differently. After Gideon restored Marian's full right to take her machine and leave, was she right to risk it for the growers? Or did saving the community allow Samuel's broken promises to claim one final payment from her? If you had stood in Marian's place with your property finally free and a train waiting east, would you have stayed for the growers? Or taken the machine and refused to pay for promises you never made?